Hello everybody. Welcome to this month's Usomi webinar. Today we have a very interesting topic, which is kind of interesting because it covers the whole value chain, I think, in radiology, and we will see how radiology AI can impact this clinical value chain. And my name is Daniel Pinto. I'm one of the moderators today, and I'll hand it over to Pinar, who will moderate with me to introduce the speaker, and then we'll go ahead.
Thank you, Daniel. So today we have Dr. Franz Pfister. He studied medicine at the Ludwig Maximilians University in Munich, with many titles as a medical doctor and a data scientist and an entrepreneur. Dr. Pfister is considered a leading expert at the interface between medicine and AI. His main goals for this field are to improve the quality of patient care and the efficiency of healthcare systems, for which he was awarded the Eugene Prize in 2019. He's also the co-founder and CEO of deepc. deepc is a company that works on the development of medical products with the aim of simplifying and improving the workflow in imaging diagnostics with AI and software technology. And Dr. Pfister will tell us more about the vision of this young company and also its clinical perspective. If you have any questions during the presentation, please write them in the Q&A box below at the right side, and we will discuss all questions at the end of the presentation. Dr. Pfister, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pinar, and also Daniel for hosting this session tonight. It's a real pleasure to be here at this jointly hosted Usomi deepc webinar. Thank you also for the introduction. So my name is Franz Pfister. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of deepc, as Pinar already said. What do we do at deepc? We are building a radiology AI platform to facilitate and make easy the rollout and deployment of clinical AI solutions into the radiology workflow. And that's going to be the topic for tonight. It's going to be how can AI actually create clinical value, not only in reading, but actually across the whole clinical value chain. We are looking at a talk which is structured in a couple of different parts. First of all, I'll give you a brief intro to the general field, and then highlight the hot topics that we see in radiology AI in 2022, and then dive into the clinical value creation of AI. I will show you some cutting edge research, but also some really cool products from friends and partner companies of ours. So radiology has actually come a long way when it goes in, when it's about innovation. It all started in 1895 with the invention of X-ray, and then many new technologies have been introduced over the time. But for a very long time, since the 70s, there has only been very gradual innovation and change in the field. But only in 2015, we saw that the rise of AI could really transform this field of radiology and facilitate a breakthrough in the field. So in the very beginning, research has mainly been focused on the actual performance of those AI algorithms, showcasing their ability to detect specific pathologies or also to perform classification tasks, and then comparing the performance to radiologists. So it was around the question, how good would the AI perform versus doctors? We've come a long way ever since, and now we are looking more at the question, how can doctors perform in an augmented way with AI? And I'm already really happy about this, because in the very beginning, there have been bold statements like the one from Geoffrey Hinton in 2016, who predicted that in 5 years, we don't need radiologists anymore, which is, of course, not true. He even suggested that we should stop training radiologists now. I'm quite relieved that this didn't happen. If we look at this chart, we even see a slight increase, which is great. But on the other hand, we also see one of the major challenges in the field, which is a huge workload increase driven by a huge demand in radiology diagnostics. And this, of course, as you can imagine, leads to a tremendously worsened demand-supply gap challenge, which is in turn causing a lot of challenges downstream. For example, physician burnout or senior positions being unfilled. and also the time pressure that radiologists are currently working in can increase error rates. So we see a lot of evidence that AI can help as a transformative technology to bridge this demand-supply gap, and we will look into this deeper today. So what are the hot topics that we see currently in radiology AI in this year, 2022? We have identified 6 of the hottest topics. We've mentioned those in one of the previous webinars a couple of weeks back. One of the biggest challenges that we see and that we also tackle with our company is AI deployment and scale. There are many different AI vendors in the field. There are many different clinical customers. Bringing those together with a poor standardization can be really challenging. The second one is clinical workflow integration. Often we recognize that AI algorithms are unequal to products, and there is a really poor standardization of integration. The third one is the validation of AI performance. There are, without doubt, existing biases. There are generalizability issues, and there is poor standardization. So this is a field where a lot of attention is spent currently on, and I believe for good reasons. The fourth one, also really hot topic, is the clinical validation of AI. So it's not so much about the machine learning AI performance in the lab, but actually looking at how we can generate clear proof points of the clinical value and also improvement in clinical and patient outcomes that AI can help with. The fifth area is about the numbers. It's about financing of AI. Due to the fact that it's such a new field, an innovative field, there haven't been established clear reimbursement structures, for example. And at this point in time, therefore, we need clear return on investment profiles and calculations of those solutions, and also really understand the beneficiary structure. Who is in the end benefiting from the use of AI? May it be the radiologist, may it be the department, may it be another department, or may it even be the health system, including the patient. So all of those questions need to be answered in order to address the question of financing of AI. And then last but not least, we've seen a trend in building up technological literacy, emphasizing AI education and fostering and building those ecosystems. So tonight, I'm going to focus primarily on the number 4 and number 5, the clinical validation of AI, and then leading to good reasons for financing of AI. So I'm well aware that the radiology workflow is quite complex, and when we ask 100 customers, they will probably tell us that there are 100 different radiology workflows. So I don't want to offend anyone tonight by majorly oversimplifying the radiology workflow. I'm taking into account that there are different variants, of course, but we see 4 key components. Of course, there are components and areas that come afterwards, for example, image sharing, and then also like billing, etc., or some that come more upstream, like scheduling. But we are looking tonight at those 4 building blocks, which we see as image acquisition, triaging, especially in emergency cases, then reading, which includes interpretation, and then obviously reporting. So let's look at the first one, image acquisition. And I brought a couple of examples from product and from research. And I'll start with a product from a partner company of ours, which comes from Denmark, a beautiful Copenhagen, which is called Cerebrio. And their product I find really smart. So it's literally a smart product. It's called Smart Protocol, and it helps in MRI imaging to adapt the protocol and the sequence selection by defining, reduce recalls and reduce the contrast usage in those scans. So how does it work? Without Smart Protocol, as you know, an MRI scan can take up to 30 or even 60 minutes with contrast usage. And with Cerebrio's Smart Protocol product, you would just focus initially on the core sequences, speeding up the acquisition time up to 10 minutes. And then they use anomaly detection software based on deep learning to determine if in those core sequences a pathology can be found. And if there is no pathology, they would not run any additional sequences. And in all other cases where there is a pathology found or there's an indication for pathology, additional sequences or even contrast enhancement agents will be applied. So this can really help speed up the process, because most scans, obviously, as you all know, don't show any major findings, and can really help speed up the whole process with those smart protocol technologies. So if you're interested in trying out this technology, reach out to us, and we are very happy to facilitate a pilot. So next one is from Subtle Medical from the US. Really like their product, which is based on generative machine learning technology, especially deep learning, which is helping accelerating the scan times. They would modify the parameters of the MRI scanner, and therefore more noisy images would be produced, but then they use their great algorithms and technology to upsample those again. Very simplistic way of describing this really deep tech technology. But in essence, what can be facilitated is a great improvement in acquisition times, which can be even halved. And also the technology can be used to decrease the use of dosage of contrast enhancement agents. A third area which is served with Subtle's product is super resolution, especially for brainstem or cerebellum acquisition of images. Obviously in those use cases, both that I showed you, Cerebrius and Subtle Medicals, we have clear value drivers. And I'm highlighting those and also giving a summary later on. We see first dimension, obviously, in efficiency. So smart protocoling and scan acceleration each can realize more than a 40% decrease in scan acquisition times and really facilitate higher utilization if you think at large scale. The second one, which is probably not that obvious from the very beginning, but if you think about it, if you shorten the scan times, you can create immediate patient benefit. Because you can facilitate the prevention of claustrophobia in the MRI scanner. Like it's a very common situation that we all know. And also you may be able to decrease the usage of contrast enhancement agent by decreasing the dosage. So an immediate patient benefit, and distinguishing from the clinical outcome, which can be achieved by faster time to diagnosis, which obviously leads to improved clinical outcomes, for example, in stroke care. The fourth dimension is a quality gain, especially for features like super resolution, which can directly improve the scan quality. So to sum up, we see 4 dimensions: efficiency gain, patient benefit, clinical outcome improvement, and quality gain. So I'm always summarizing, like after going from one step to the other, so to keep an overview of the key values. Obviously, in image acquisition, efficiency gain is a key driver. So let's look into triaging. I brought one example for triaging, which is from a little bit older publication, but I really like it. That's why I'm bringing it up again. It's on the evaluation of an ICH detection algorithm, which would facilitate the change in the order of the work list and enable the radiologists to look at those scans at first that are of immediate concern and include emergency pathologies. So in this case, and there are a couple of products out there in the market for ICH detection. For example, there is one from Avicenna, one of our partners, or also Cure AI, can really help decrease the time to diagnosis by up to 96%. Okay, there is a caveat to this. Obviously, it depends on the care setting. If it's a maximum care center, of course, the benefit by decreasing the time to diagnosis will be lower. But in general, this is the idea behind those products. And we also have a product in the pipeline, which is consolidating all of those different emergency flags from different AI products, which will enter the market later this year. So let's look at the benefits of AI usage for triaging. On the one hand, it's obviously clinical outcomes. Faster treatment decisions lead to better outcomes. especially like in emergency care, like stroke or also pulmonary embolism. And secondly, efficiency gains as well, because faster treatment decisions would lead to more efficient workflows. For example, it could even trigger higher ROI in some cases and geographies, as in LVO detection, which can trigger interventional radiology procedures. So let's look at the third one after triaging, which is mainly benefiting in clinical outcome, but also efficiency gains, which is the reading domain. And obviously, most products at this point in time are focusing on the reading domain. There is the most evidence that there is a clinical value generation in that domain. And I'll give you a couple of more examples. To start off with, I'm showing you a ICA detection algorithm evaluation by the Stanford ML group. It's a paper from 2019. I really like this paper because it was one of the first of its kind that switched from evaluation AI versus human to an approach where the AI performance was not in the primary focus, but what the researchers evaluated was actually a comparison between an unaugmented read versus an AI augmented read. So it was like radiologist alone versus radiologist plus AI. And here in this specific case, they looked at CTA exams where the AI would highlight intracranial aneurysms. And this was a kind of blueprint, this kind of study design for many studies that followed. And I'll show you a couple of others in a minute. In this specific study, the performance of the radiologist alone was, not surprisingly, already very high and very good. But what the study showed as well is that with the use of AI, the detection rate of intracranial aneurysms could even be further increased, obviously leading to the possibility to discuss an intervention and possibly avoiding like severe complications like subarachnoid hemorrhage or others. So this is also available as a product by a company, not for CTA, but for MRI scans in the TOF sequence by our very good partners from Berlin called MediAir. One of their products focuses on intracranial aneurysm detection in MRI scans, really facilitating that process of quality improvement. Also, MediAir has many other cool products, especially in the MRI domain. Two of their other products are focusing on MS lesion detection or volumetry. And this can be used for screening in Alzheimer's, for example. And they have published some recent work, which is pretty impressive. On the one hand, it's showing increased diagnostic accuracy, especially like in junior colleagues, the diagnostic accuracy was boosted tremendously. Also, there was a small increase in diagnostic accuracy in senior colleagues that got augmented by AI. But especially in the junior group, the effect was really mind-blowing. On the other hand, they looked at the efficiency gain in terms of reduction of reading time, which was on average 25%, the largest effect size in brain volumetry, with a reduction in reading time of 57%. Imagine, like this is a huge benefit, which directly translates into a return on invest for each dollar you spend on AI usage. So looking at some other examples, this is from our partner company, Lunit. They have a great collection of clinical evidence for the value creation of their products. In this case, they looked at the detection rate of critical and urgent findings. And in critical findings, the detection rate was increased by more than 145%, whereas in urgent findings, there was also an increase of 6%, which is pretty impressive if you think about the implications that this can have in ED care. And also, they looked at a reduction in reading time, which I find also quite impressive, which was around 33%, which translates into 1.5x efficiency gain. And again, this is just reading, not including reporting. So also from Lunit, there is a mammography product in the market. And I really like this study specifically that they published, which is looking at the whole process of mammography screening or mammogram screening. In the usual status quo process, the mammogram is read by 2 radiologists, and in the control or in the study group, the mammogram was read only by 1 radiologist plus an AI screening. And this obviously already suggests a tremendously very high efficiency gain, because you would be able to read more mammograms with the augmentation of AI. But on top of that, the cancer detection rate also was increased by 17%. So a great study that demonstrates and showcases how AI can create value in many different domains, on the efficiency front, but also on the quality front, which will then, of course, translate into patient benefit and clinical outcomes. Then we have recently, with our partners from TUM, released a study where we as a platform company would evaluate on a more broad level the usage of anomaly detection algorithms in CT head exams. It's a very similar setup to the Stanford ML study. So that's why I mentioned it in the beginning. It was a kind of blueprint for many studies that followed. And in this study, it was the comparison of unaugmented versus augmented by AI CT head exams. And it was, again, associated with the washout period, with the first run with the standard reading process, and the second run with the AI augmentation. And specifically, we looked with our colleagues from TUM at the difference in reading time in the inexperienced and experienced group, which was similar on average. Of course, the inexperienced group, it benefited a little bit more, but especially for the normal cases, the effect was pretty huge. So you can read it up in the study. It was published in Journal of Diagnostics just last week. And the other dimension of value creation that we looked at was at the number of missed findings that could be reduced in both groups consistently by 40–45% with the usage of AI, which, of course, in brain scans and brain pathologies can create a lot of value or even being life-saving. So let's look at another example, similar setup from our great partners Glime from France. Their studies have been comparing, and there have been 2 publications in radiology, one both in 2021. They also looked at X-rays being read by radiologists unaugmented by AI versus the X-ray being read by radiologists plus AI. And again, the sensitivity in fracture detection was increased by 10%, whereas the reading time was decreased, which is, of course, a tremendous value in both dimensions. To sum up, reading and interpretation can really benefit by the usage of AI. Of course, in terms of efficiency gains by highlighting AI findings for easier recognition, or the acceleration of work-intense tasks like quantification in the example of brain volumetry or MS lesion detection. The second dimension is the quality gain, more precise diagnostics and more reliable detection of findings, especially, and this is quite interesting for more junior colleagues. Also, senior colleagues might benefit, but especially the junior colleagues benefit a lot from the guidance they get. And as a remark in our paper, we also looked at the quality, which was increased in the junior colleagues, but also the reading time was decreased at the same time. So sometimes you would fear kind of bias, especially of junior colleagues with the usage of AI. But even in those cases where the AI was wrong, the junior colleagues still got it right. So that was a key finding. You can, as I said, look it up online. It's open access. The third dimension is clinical outcome again. Obviously, more precise diagnostics can lead to earlier detection of findings, earlier treatment initiation, and avoidance of deterioration. Obviously, this is a very tricky one because you need to run population health studies to prove that at large scale. So it's obvious that like more precise diagnostics and early detection will lead to better clinical outcomes, but there is little evidence at this point in time, obviously, because this is a long-term effort to demonstrate and show. And the fourth one is, again, patient benefit. Here I want to give you an example. Of course, if diagnostics are more precise, you can also help avoid revisits or making additional exams. For example, in Glima's example with fracture detection in X-ray scans, 10% more sensitivity in detection of fractures in X-rays obviously also helps avoid revisits or doctor hopping. Like you don't need to, as a patient, you don't need to go to another doctor to look at the same scan or even do an additional scan, which comes with radiation exposure, but you can really get the diagnosis directly. And this could also translate into a return on invest, especially in cases where the radiology department and the downstream departments that are treating the patient are in the same institution. For example, imagine 10% more higher detection rate of fractures would obviously secure this institution also a 10% higher rate of interventions. For example, surgery or orthopedic intervention. So this is something to keep in mind, that it could also depend on the care setting that you're in, who is one of the beneficiaries downstream. Okay, so let's look at the last one, which is reporting. I'm really excited about this one because we have already seen early evidence that this is the toughest nut to crack, obviously, but also the honeypot in the end. So let's look at this. Maybe as a recap, we as deepc are providing deepc OS, which is a system which allows institutions just with a single installation to integrate AI at large scale without any additional setup fees or long waiting times. So what we do on the one hand is an integration with the AI vendors with common standards. But also we do a deep integration with those vendors in order to also communicate in a deep integration with existing radiology IT systems. Those could include the PACS or the RIS, but also it could include systems like reporting systems. And here we see a extremely high value in the future. And I'll give you an example of a partnership that we have started with a company called NeoQ from Berlin. Their product called Radio Report is a software which they call a guided reporting software. They're providing very granular templates for structured guided reporting. And obviously with that interface that we have built, we are able to enable Radio Report and its users to pre-populate radiology reports as the study enters the worklist. And this is an example where we couple the product from Radio Report through our operating system, building the bridge to AI product. In this case, it's Avicenna's product suite for the detection of intracranial hemorrhage and large vessel occlusion. And in this case, we have integrated deeply with both parties and facilitate the pre-population of reports. And of course, this is a kind of first proof of concept that this works. But if you extrapolate and imagine how this will look like in 3, 5, or 10 years, of course, at some point, we are facing a future where the radiologist is opening the study and most of those reporting fields are already pre-filled. And this is going to be a real game changer in the future. So we have also run a couple of research studies, again, with our partners TUM and the University Hospital Rechts der Isar here in Munich, where we have looked at 2 scenarios with 2 doctors, where we compared the standard reporting workflow that they use in clinical routine Most of them are dictating in free text, versus this AI enhanced reporting workflow, where the AI would, on the one hand, highlight the findings in the images, but also pre-populate the reports. And the results that we saw have been pretty mind-blowing. It was very early evidence, but the reporting time, reading and writing the report, was tremendously reduced by 67%. And this is obviously the honeypot where we need to work towards in the end to build this bridge between great innovation and AI products on the one hand, and then existing infrastructures and reporting software to unlock this tremendous value. And as you can see, I mean, I don't need to explain a lot. It's only 1/3 of the reporting time, which is obviously a game changer for the field and can really help fill that demand supply gap in the end. So the last product I'm gonna show you is from our friends at Rad AI. It's a US company. Their product is currently only available in the US. I'm happy to highlight this. Hi, Josh. Their product is really cool because it's going away from just image interpretation. It's more focusing on language-based models and helps the users to save up to 60 minutes per day with automated report impressions. So how the product works is the radiologist would dictate their normal report impressions, and then, the report findings. And then based on those findings, the software automatically is generating the report impressions, lowers the number of words you dictate by up to 35%, and gives users a cognitive break between the reports. This is how it looks like. Really like the approach. It's one of those products where you immediately get the value it creates. There's not a lot of explanation necessary, and they are quite successful in the US. Can't wait to get you over to Europe. Cool. So let's look at the benefits. On the one hand, we see clearly the efficiency gains by pre-population of reports with AI findings and quantifications or language-based models such as Rad AI's product. On the other hand, it's quality gain because of the more standardized reporting quality across institutions, radiologists, through reporting templates. And we know that this is not primarily an AI benefit, obviously, but AI can really help make guided or structured reporting a smooth experience and really unlock this value. So let's sum up. We have looked into different domains: image acquisition, triaging, reading, and reporting, and we see key value drivers in all of those dimensions. So there are always 4 dimensions that we see. It's efficiency, patient benefit, clinical outcome, and quality gain. And the different steps have put different emphasis on those value dimensions. I hope I could give you some great examples of how the whole radiology workflow and the value chain can be improved. Obviously, as I said before, there are areas where AI can also play a role in the future, for example, for scheduling and prognosis, but this would be too much content for this webinar. So we have seen a lot of examples how AI can help fill this demand supply gap and make radiologists faster in decisions, more accurate, and improving the quality, and of course, more efficient. And of course, especially the last one is also very interesting for the managers of the institutions. And I think getting more and more proof points for all of those dimensions is really important and crucial to foster AI adoption at scale. So what we see as deepc and we as a company, what we see as one of the major bottlenecks for large-scale AI deployment is currently the following situation. Today, we see more than 500 regulatory cleared, commercially viable products in the market. Great products, most of them, and it's a jungle. It's an AI jungle. And as an institution, you not only want to integrate one AI product into your workflow, you want to get holistic help and support by AI. So institutions typically need somewhere between 3 and 20 different AI solutions. And if you are adopting AI, it can be really burdensome to navigate in this jungle. Why? So it starts with curation. First of all, you need to look into the whole AI world to identify the best companies and the best solutions that fit best your specific and individual workflow. The second one is regulatory compliance checks, data privacy checks, cybersecurity audits and checks. And then you need to set up and include IT. Sometimes AI is hosted on-prem, which requires even sometimes to buy server and GPU infrastructures, which then, of course, can also cause additional downstream cost for maintenance. And then obviously you would have a contract with each and every one of those companies and establish a legal framework for data security, and you have a billing cycle with each of those companies. So this process works well for the deployment of 1, 2, maybe 3 AI algorithms, although it costs time and is quite cost intense, but it's definitely not scalable. And that's what we are addressing with deepc, with our operating system. We build partnerships and integrations with those AI partners where we select the best products and the best companies that are out there in the market. And with a single installation, we deploy those into our customer infrastructures, delivering AI at scale. Of course, this has a couple of benefits. We are acting as an imaging AI one-stop shop. We are establishing a data privacy framework with the customers once that helps, on the one hand, the customers not being obliged to run through data privacy checks with each and every company again and again, but also it helps the companies to access new customers without any hassle, just doing an integration with us once and being covered in that regard. Then we are facilitating fast and easy integration. Everything can be installed remotely. There's really little overhead for the IT department. Then usually those algorithms are really smoothly integrated into the workflow by running in the background. And our target always is that the radiologist gets the result when they open the study. Then there is a money saving factor because there is no hosting effort required. And obviously there's a unified contract support and billing process. Currently we offer 35 clinical AI algorithms together with our partners, and are expanding the portfolio week by week. So to sum up, let's look back at where we started, the hot topics in Red AI. I would like to give you our perspective, how we contribute to addressing those challenges. Obviously, our core product is helping with AI deployment at scale. We are integrating with those many AI vendors. We are integrating with many different clinical customers, standardize the process, and really help everyone in the ecosystem to smoothly integrate and deploy AI at scale. Second one is our efforts in regards to the deep integration into clinical workflows to really help customers get a smooth customer experience and product experience. The third one is in the area of AI performance. There has been a lot of recent activity in the field. For example, large review papers like the one on the left that is evaluating the diagnostic accuracy of those models, or also on the right, which was just published, I think last week or the week before, a great paper. Also, Eric Topol was contributing to this paper, which is suggesting a lot of great ideas to rule out existing biases, generalizability issues, etc. And of course, and that's in the middle, we ourselves are testing those AI algorithms before we deploy them, and have our own internal tools and software frameworks to do so, also at scale. The fourth dimension is the clinical validation of AI. Hopefully, I could open your eyes tonight how AI can create value in all of those different domains and also translate in the end to great efficiency and return on investment cases that would justify the financing of AI and specific tools. And the sixth one, which is something that I really find quite important, is technological literacy. Obviously, radiologists at some point should be able to smoothly work with AI without even recognizing that AI is helping them in the background, but we're not there yet. And there is a long way to get there. And also, we are far away from fully automated systems. In the meantime, we need to build that trust between the intelligent systems and human individuals. And this trust can be fostered and built by building up technological literacy, and DeepC is involved in many different initiatives. We, of course, run our own webinar series, and hopefully you will see our this webinar in our YouTube channel in a couple of days to review it if you're interested. We are also contributing to initiatives like AI Pro Health or supporting academic groups that are pushing those initiatives for fostering of technological literacy forward. We see this as a core competence, and we are very motivated and committed to contribute in fostering and building those ecosystems to, on the one hand, help radiologists and doctors better use and understand those products, but in the end, to increase patient safety and improve clinical outcomes in the end. So I'm coming to the end of my talk. Thank you very much for your attention. We are really deeply committed to contribute in all of those dimensions. And this is only 2022. At some point in time, there will be new challenges, I'm pretty sure. And we are deeply committed to make our contribution to this path we are all together on. Thank you very much also for this hosting this great webinar, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Yeah, cool. Franz, thank you very, very much. That was a very nice presentation. We have some questions coming in from the audience already, and I just want to encourage again everybody to post them in the chat in the Q&A box. Just let me start with a quick question that I had myself that probably is also interesting to hear from your perspective as a vendor. So obviously, I guess you talked to a lot of radiologists and clinicians. Is there a pattern emerging on what radiologists expect most from AI, or what they would want AI to solve for them? What's your feeling from your experience?
It's a very good question, Daniel. There is no standard answer because the use cases and settings that we see are very diverse. So we are seeing like emergency care settings, we're seeing routine care settings in hospitals, but then we also see outpatient settings or even teleradiology settings. And each customer group, and sometimes even each individual physician, has their own expectations and hopes how AI can help them. And for us, also in the work together with the customers, it's very important to address those expectations and really solve their problems and pick the right products that would help them in their process. Yeah, hope this answer is not too unsatisfying.
Yeah, I mean, no, that's obviously, I guess that's the answer. I was just wondering if there was any specific pattern coming up, but I guess it's very individual, as you said.
Yeah.
Then let's continue with the questions from the audience, perhaps. So Anand Prabhakar, if I pronounced that right, in your opinion, why isn't AI being implemented in all hospitals in the world? Very broad question.
It's a very broad and very good question. Obviously, I believe it's going to happen very soon, and it must happen. It's going to be a commodity at some point in time, and it's going to be rolled out at large scale. Currently, we see those challenges that I highlighted. I think we are still looking at a technology innovation lifecycle, we're still at the beginning. So I think we have probably passed the early adopter innovator segment and now starting with mass scaling and mass adoption, but probably it will still take a couple of years to also reach the technology laggards and overcome those skepticism also in all hospitals of the world. Yeah.
Maybe if I can just ask a question that came to my mind before we get back to the audience questions. Yeah. I really like the thing you showed with the automated impressions, which I think is a very good use case to use AI to kind of, get guideline information and then go through the report in some form and provide suggestions for follow-up guidelines and stuff. I guess like integrating AI with image-based models is probably easy because everything speaks DICOM or whatever. But do you have any experience? Because I would imagine that like in Germany, there's various risk vendors, other countries use reporting in the packs and so on. Others use fully independent speech recognition. Is that something you're looking into also to integrate these modalities? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Daniel, and especially when you start integration with those existing systems, you're entering the interfacing and integration hell. And we're trying in the following product releases, which will come still in the first half of 2022, we are building unified interfaces with those RIS and PACS vendors, which would make integration easier and the customer doesn't even recognize it, but only can enjoy a smooth experience from the user experience point of view. So we have started first collaborations that we have already officially announced, for example, with DigiThirst or also with Nexus Chile, to European providers to facilitate that. We call it deep integration into workflows. It requires a lot of plumbing in the background, but our aim is to really facilitate the users to have a smooth experience and integrate AI into their existing and used or the workflows they are used to. Yeah.
I also have a question. Actually, Daniel asked about the main wanted. That was also one of my questions. But you mentioned there's this, you as a company are just a one-stop shop. How do you validate the AI jungle out there? Yeah. Because there are different individual questions, I guess, from hospitals, other companies, perhaps. Yeah. How does the validation go from your side?
It's a very good question, and we put a lot of effort into this. Again, this is something that the customer usually doesn't see, but we have an own team who does this, our AI ecosystem team, and it consists of AI experts, but also industry experts. And we have a multi-stage process. Obviously, there is the performance validation of the algorithms, but we start earlier. First, we want to understand really the clinical value of those use cases. And if they actually produce and result in clinical value generation, then we obviously get to know the companies and build a relationship and really understand the products, look at the publications, etc. And then we have, as part of this multi-stage process, which has more aspects, but I think this one is really important. We are also looking into the performance validation of the algorithms. And this is, again, a multi-stage process. We are looking at vendor specifications in a very first step. Then we are looking into an actual machine learning performance testing, which we do in the lab to especially look into the generalizability of those models and if there are existing biases. So we have partnerships with some clinical partners that would provide us with diverse data to prove the generalizability of the models. And then as a third step, before we would deploy models, usually what we do, we are testing on customer data as well, because there can be surprises and we don't want this to be a frustrating process either for the customer nor for the AI partner. So we are facilitating this. Yeah.
So should I see that as an extension of studies as well, or performing research within the company too, or is it just the validation for that product?
So the clinical validation studies, we're happy to facilitate those and enable companies to run those. But we are not running those usually ourselves. So we are running studies as deepc, more on general questions around testing techniques. For example, we have a large research project going on with an academic partner. We are looking at use cases like broad use cases like anomaly detection with a study that I showed you in the talk. But it's more like really broad research questions that we answer. What we don't do is like running for our partners like clinical validation studies. We're happy to facilitate the process with the framework that we have. But this is usually in the domain of the vendor, which is also something that they need to show, especially in Europe for the medical device certification under MDR, which is the new medical device regulation, which came into play last year in May.
There's a couple of questions coming in from the audience. I think one of those we already answered, which is there was a question if like you need the hospitals to have standardized imaging, which I understand is not the case. You will test on their images and then just see if there's some trouble there. Two questions that kind of go into the same direction that I think you can probably answer together is, so there was one question in the chat, whether the finance aspects are on a per case basis or a fixed rate. And then the second thing that I kind of think is connected to that is, do you have a completely on-premise thing as well, or does this necessarily need to be connected to the cloud? Because as one attendee writes, US hospitals seem to be very conservative about cloud-based stuff.
Yeah, so very good question. So when we started this journey, I was very unsure if deepc can function as a cloud platform because there is a lot of skepticism towards cloud, and there is a lot of conservatism with respect to cloud usage. However, we have developed a framework, a data privacy framework, which has passed many data protection officers, also in very conservative Germany, which would allow us to run a cloud setup. And of course, technically, we could do an on-premise deployment. It's just not very favorable for anyone. I give you an example. On-premise, you're often very constrained by the resources that you have. This can result, for example, in an inability to manage peak loads. Let's say 10 exams are produced at the same time and want to be processed by the AI. You simply, they are queuing up, they are piling up, and let this be an emergency setting. It's not a good idea. At the same time, when you look at the cloud setup, we can easily spin up 10 instances. It can be 100 or thousands at the same time to manage dynamically those load peaks, for example. And there are other factors playing a role, for example, maintenance of the machines or updating of the AI algorithms is another factor. So if you do that in a decentralized fashion, can be quite burdensome for all players involved. So we have made very good experience with cloud setups. They're especially in conservative countries like Germany. This can be challenging, but we have made a lot of very good experience, and the pushback that we get is pretty marginal, I would say. So I was positively surprised by this. Yeah.
And can you just kind of quickly answer the financial aspects, like? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. There have been questions about the financing. There are different models. Usually it's volume dependent. And we are working with hospitals to allocate yearly budgets for the usage of AI. So what we usually don't do is like a pay-per-use model. Usually we are estimating the volume budget that a hospital runs per year and then allocate maximum thresholds, such that it's also fitting the budget schemes of hospitals. I think another question was if there are still separate contracts and how does support work. So one benefit that we as DeepC provide is that there is only one contract with DeepC, and we are subcontracting the respective firms, which is a great benefit for all players, obviously, to streamline this process. And also we cover first-line support.
Right. Pinar, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So a very direct question to have your opinion is, by end of 2025, how many AI startups will survive in your opinion?
It's a very good question that we ask ourselves. We hope and give our very best that all of them survive. We see our role as an ecosystem company and a platform company that we want to enable the companies out there. And we have a lot in our product development pipeline, a lot of features that would really help those companies to succeed and of course to survive.
And just maybe one very technical question that someone posed here. Is this platform, does that need separate regulatory clearance, or is the kind of, yeah?
It's a very good question. So no, DeepC doesn't need extra regulatory clearance. It's a data system and counts as data system both in the US and in the EU. On the one hand, it is subject to regulatory frameworks like the NDR, for instance, but it's not a medical device. So we need to fulfill rules, and those are pretty strict. Also, our company is ISO 13485 certified, which is the major norm that we operate under, but the platform itself is not a medical device. But all the products on top are certified and FDA cleared medical devices, at least the ones that we offer, of course, in geography. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, there are some questions that are a bit more broad as well, and I guess also difficult to answer. I would say, how many diagnoses could an AI with certainly answer? I mean, are there already specific tools or algorithms that are already there?
It's a very broad range at this point in time. There are tools that are having a binary output, which is like normal or abnormal. And then it goes into a range. For example, there is a product from an Australian company called Annalise, which is really comprehensive, outputting more than 120 different findings in a chest X-ray. So it's a really broad range. Also, it depends obviously on the needs, the clinical needs of the radiologists, and finding the best solutions for the customers is our mandate.
Yeah.
And yeah, Pinar, sorry.
No worries. I was going to the second question of a bit more on the research side and also validating, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead.
So handling the false positives within AI models, when you evaluate the different models for, in the jungle again, how do you cope with that? Or do you have specific tools that you apply to see how the false positives are, or what you can do about that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So first of all, we run lab tests where we see the performance before we even deploy to a first customer, where we can already evaluate and work with the vendor to evaluate different models and then the performance of the different AI models. Once it's deployed in the wild, obviously you would like to avoid false positives. AI can fail as well, as humans do. So it's never perfect. And I think this is something that radiologists should be aware of. There are some products that are nearly perfect, which is great. And they are providing a lot of clinical value, but it can happen. And what we as DeepC and the platform do is to build infrastructure to also incorporate the feedback of radiologists in further product iterations and enable our partner companies to have the chance to improve their products and highlight those specific cases.
There was one interesting, I guess, research project you showed in where the junior residents, I mean, when the AI didn't pick it up, it could be picked up by them.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I think we are kind of approaching the 60-minute mark. So just maybe just one last question that we want to squeeze in. Maybe I'm just seeing which one to do. I mean, I just would go with one question that you probably can answer very quickly, and then I leave a last question to be answered more in extent. So one question was, do you support hospitals or institutions to develop their own in-house AI products? I'm not sure if maybe just that very, very quickly. And then there was a question, how do you handle cases where like the diagnosis is very time sensitive, where you need to have a very, very good performance? How do you handle that? But maybe just those two questions, and then we'll need to close, I guess.
I'll keep my answers. Short. Maybe I take the second question first and advertise again the cloud. You can really, for those time-sensitive cases, dramatically reduce the times, the processing times by using larger clusters. So this is also what we do, especially, for example, in stroke care. We wouldn't use standard clusters. We press a button. I mean, in the background, it's not easy as that, but for the customer experience, we can allocate higher instances and stronger instances to really bring down the processing times to almost real time. And then the first question was around the usage of the platform and our positioning for research use. We haven't offered that initially, as we only use commercially viable solutions on the platform, but almost every academic institution asked us if it's possible to use the platform. So we evaluated and came to the conclusion that it's actually, yes, it is possible. And we're currently working on a product offering to make this happen.
Thank you very much for answering all the questions. They're still coming in, actually.
Yeah, I guess maybe you just answer them in the YouTube comment section later on. We'll post it to our channel.
Maybe we have to organize another one, webinar.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but I mean, it was very, very interesting, and it was nice to see that there's a good response from the audience and that people are interested. So yeah, Pieter, maybe I'll leave the closing remarks to you.
Yes, thank you very much for this extensive overview of the clinical value. And you still said what you said, there's still a beginning and then another end aspect to this, but it was very clear and very detailed and brought a lot of questions. So thank you very much for your time. And thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar. And our next webinar will be on the 28th of March, and we will discuss about the publishing process of the basic knowledge of medical imaging informatics. So have a great evening or morning, wherever you are, and see you next time.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye. Bye.